The midnight shift. As I stepped through the sliding doors of the 24-hour supermarket, a shiver ran down my spine. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty aisles. It was my first shift on the graveyard shift, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. I brushed aside my unease and headed towards the employee break room to clock in. The manager, Mr. Jenkins, greeted me with a curt nod before disappearing into his office, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. As the night wore on, strange occurrences began to unfold. I caught glimpses of movements out of the corner of my eye, products shifting on the shelves, aisles rearranging themselves when I blinked. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue, the result of working the late shift. But as the hours passed, the unsettling feeling in the air only grew stronger. Flickering lights and distant whispers echoed through the empty store, sending chills down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew there was something sinister lurking in the shadows. Then, I saw them ghostly figures drifting through the aisles, their faces twisted in anguish. They were the past employees of the supermarket, I realized, their tragic ends etched into their spectral forms. Some had met accidents while working the late shift, while others had disappeared without a trace, their fates forever sealed within these walls. I tried to avoid them, to pretend they weren't there, but they seemed to be drawn to me, their mournful cries growing louder with each passing moment. It was as if they were seeking vengeance on the living for the injustices they had suffered in life. Trapped in the supermarket until morning, I knew I had to uncover the dark secrets hidden within its walls if I had any hope of surviving the night. But the more I searched, the more I realized that the store held secrets far darker than I could have ever imagined. In the back storeroom, I stumbled upon a dusty old ledger, its pages filled with accounts of accidents and disappearances that had occurred over the years. It was clear that something sinister was at play, something that had been lurking in the shadows of the supermarket for far too long. But before I could delve any deeper, I heard a blood-curdling scream echoing through the aisles. Racing towards the sound, I found myself face to face with one of the ghostly figures, a young woman, her eyes filled with pain and anger. She reached out to me, her hand passing through my own, if I were nothing more than a wisp of smoke. "Help us," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo in the empty store. "Help us find peace." With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized that the only way to break the curse that bound these lost souls to the supermarket was to uncover the truth of what had happened to them. And so, with the ghostly figures as my guides, I began to piece together the dark history of the store. I learned of a tragedy that had occurred years ago, a fire that had swept through the building, claiming the lives of several employees who had been working the late shift. Their spirits had lingered in the ashes, unable to find rest until their deaths had been avenged. But as I delved deeper into the store's past, I uncovered something even more sinister, a web of deceit and betrayal that stretched back decades, a secret that had been buried beneath the supermarket's glossy exterior. And at the heart of it all was Mr. Jenkins, the manager who had greeted me so curtly on my first night. He had been involved in the cover-up of the fire, I realized, willing to sacrifice the lives of his employees to protect his own interests. Armed with this knowledge, I confronted Mr. Jenkins in his office, the ghostly figures at my side. His eyes widened in horror as I revealed the truth of his crimes, his mask of authority crumbling in the face of his guilt. But even as he begged for forgiveness, I knew that the only way to break the curse that bound the supermarket was to confront the darkness head-on. With the help of the ghostly figures, I banished Mr. Jenkins from the store, his screams echoing into the night as he disappeared into the darkness. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I felt a sense of peace settle over the supermarket. The ghostly figures had finally found rest, their tormented souls released from the curse that had bound them for so long. And as I stepped out into the cool morning air, I knew that the nightmares of the graveyard shift would haunt me no longer. For in facing the darkness that lurked within the supermarket's walls, I had found the strength to survive and the courage to confront the shadows that lingered in my own heart. As I stepped out into the cool morning air, the weight of the night's events began to lift from my shoulders. The supermarket, once a place of dread and despair, now seemed almost ordinary in the light of day. Yet, the memory of the ghostly figures and the dark secrets that had been unearthed lingered in my mind like a shadow. Returning home, I tried to put the events of the night behind me, to resume my life as if nothing had happened. But the supermarket's dark legacy refused to be forgotten, its presence looming over me like a spectre in the night. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that fateful night began to fade, replaced by the mundane routines of daily life. But just when I thought I had escaped the supermarket's grasp, strange occurrences began to unfold once again. It started with subtle whispers in the darkness, barely audible at first but growing louder with each passing night. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, fleeting glimpses of something lurking just beyond the reach of my sight. I tried to ignore them, to convince myself that it was all in my head. But as the whispers grew more insistent, I knew that something was terribly wrong. The curse that had haunted the supermarket had followed me home, its dark influence seeping into every corner of my life. Desperate for answers, I returned to the supermarket, hoping to find some clue that would explain the resurgence of the curse. But the store was empty, its shelves bare and its aisles deserted. It was as if the darkness that had once filled its halls had retreated into the shadows, biding its time until it could strike again. As I wandered through the empty store, a sense of dread washed over me, a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. And then, in the distance, I saw the faint outline of a figure standing in the shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the silence. But as I drew closer, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a chill in the air and the lingering sense of unease. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized that the curse had not been broken, merely suppressed. And now, it was stronger than ever, its malevolent presence reaching out from the darkness to claim me as its next victim. Determined to put an end to the curse once and for all, I delved deeper into its origins, scouring old records and consulting with experts in the occult. But the more I learned, the more I realized that the curse was not something that could be easily undone. It was a force of darkness that had taken root in the very fabric of reality, feeding on fear and despair with an insatiable hunger. As the nights grew longer and the whispers grew louder, I knew that my time was running out. If I didn't find a way to break the curse soon, it would consume me completely, dragging me down into the depths of darkness from which there was no escape. And so, with a heavy heart and a sense of resignation, I prepared to face the darkness once again, to confront the curse that had haunted me since that fateful night on the graveyard shift. For in the depths of the supermarket's shadows, I knew that my fate would be decided and that the price of failure would be paid in blood. The day had started like any other at the supermarket. I arrived for my shift, greeted by the usual bustle of customers and the rhythmic hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. But little did I know that this day would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my days. It began innocently enough. A team of workers had been hired to renovate the store, modernizing the aisles and updating the facilities to attract more customers. But as they tore down walls and ripped up floorboards, they made a chilling discovery: an old, sealed-off basement hidden beneath the store. Ignoring warnings to leave it undisturbed, they broke open the door and ventured inside, eager to uncover the secrets that lay within. But what they found was beyond anything they could have imagined: an ancient evil that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for its chance to break free from its prison. As darkness consumed the store, employees and customers alike found themselves trapped in a labyrinthine maze of aisles, stalked by malevolent spirits and grotesque creatures that lurked in the shadows. The once familiar supermarket had become a twisted nightmare, its shelves stacked not with groceries, but with horrors beyond comprehension. I tried to rally my fellow employees to find a way to seal the portal to the underworld before it was too late. But with each passing moment, the darkness grew stronger, its grip tightening around us like a vice. We searched frantically for any means of escape, but the store seemed to stretch on endlessly, its aisles twisting and turning in on themselves like a maze designed to confound and confuse. And all the while, the creatures of the abyss lurked in the shadows, their eyes gleaming with hunger as they closed in on their prey. With each step we took, the air grew heavier, thick with the stench of decay and despair. I could feel the darkness clawing at my mind, whispering promises of oblivion and eternal torment. But I refused to give in, clinging to the faint hope that somehow, someway, we would find a way to seal the portal and banish the evil that had been unleashed upon us. But as the hours dragged on and the horrors of the supermarket closed in around us, that hope began to fade. We were outnumbered, outmatched, our only weapons the flickering lights and the meager supplies we could scavenge from the shelves. And then, just when it seemed that all was lost, we stumbled upon a glimmer of hope, a forgotten artifact hidden in the depths of the basement, a relic of a time long past, imbued with the power to seal the portal and banish the darkness once and for all. With a newfound sense of purpose, we set out to retrieve the artifact, battling through hordes of twisted creatures and navigating the treacherous corridors of the supermarket. And finally, after what felt like an eternity of struggle, we reached the heart of the darkness, the portal to the underworld, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that threatened to consume us all. With trembling hands, I activated the artifact, channeling its power into the portal and watching as it shimmered and wavered before finally collapsing in on itself, sealing the gateway and banishing the darkness back to the depths from whence it came. As the last echoes of the nightmare faded away, we emerged from the supermarket, battered and bruised but alive. The sun was shining once again, its warm rays banishing the lingering shadows of the night. But as I looked back at the now silent supermarket, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still out there, waiting for its next chance to break free. And so, as I walked away, I vowed to remain vigilant, to never forget the horrors that had unfolded within those walls, and to always be ready to confront the darkness that lurked in the shadows. As we emerged from the supermarket, the relief was palpable among my fellow survivors. We stumbled out into the daylight, blinking in the sudden brightness as if awakening from a long, dark dream. But even as we caught our breath and tried to make sense of what had just happened, a sense of unease lingered in the air. The town was eerily quiet, the streets deserted save for the occasional passerby who hurried past without so much as a glance in our direction. It was as if the nightmare we had just escaped had cast a shadow over the entire town, tainting even the bright sunshine with its lingering malevolence. We exchanged nervous glances, each of us silently grappling with the aftermath of our ordeal. How could we go back to our normal lives after what we had witnessed? How could we ever forget the horrors that had unfolded within the depths of the supermarket? But as we stood there, lost in our own thoughts, a low rumbling sound echoed through the air, growing louder with each passing moment. And then, with a deafening crash, the ground beneath us split open, swallowing the supermarket whole. We watched in horror as the building crumbled into the abyss, its walls collapsing in on themselves like a house of cards. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the ground was still once more, leaving behind only a gaping chasm where the supermarket had once stood. It was as if the earth itself had rejected the darkness that had taken root within its depths, swallowing it whole and sealing it away from the world above. But even as we breathed a collective sigh of relief, a sense of unease lingered in the air. for we knew that the supermarket was not the only place where darkness lurked, that there were other secrets hidden beneath the surface of our seemingly ordinary town. And as we looked out at the now quiet streets, we knew that our battle was far from over. But for now, we were safe, our ordeal behind us and the promise of a new day stretching out before us. And as we turned away from the gaping chasm that had swallowed the supermarket whole, we knew that we would face whatever darkness lay ahead with courage and determination, knowing that, as long as we stood together, we could overcome even the most terrifying of nightmares.